Hi, my good sis Mari. I still can't believe it's season two, but it is what it is. It does it not feel like a bit like not more mature because we've been mature, but like I just feel seasoned, Like I just feel like we've been doing this for a while now, Like I'm just
Ma'am, we have been
mm.
doing this for a pandemic. Time is fluid. I feel like a grown woman. Dust my shoulders off. That is where we are today. No, it's so good to be back with you. It's so good to be back in general. I, as always, have to start the show by saying we are still looking for justice for our sis, Breonna Taylor. I also want to take a moment here to say we are looking for justice for Muhammad Hassan, a 24-year-old
Yeah.
Black man in Cardiff, Wales, who was detained one evening by the police and then released the next day with bruises and wounds that cannot be accounted for. He later succumbed to his injuries and died suddenly. The Cardiff police refused to release the video, but their internal investigation states that there was no foul play. The
Right.
family has so many questions. And as a show that is dedicated to advancing the equity and justice for people of color across the globe, we want to make sure that we continue to highlight things that are not just happening in the US, but things that are happening over here where we're living in the UK and across the globe. So I want to make sure we do take that moment for our brother and say that we're thinking about his family and about what's happened there.
No, 100%. I think it's quite it's not even that it's a shame, it's just like a tragedy at this point, and it's always been a tragedy even, but do you not feel tired? Like I feel so tired. And the fact that it's not even like it's horrible to say this, right? But like given the history that like London Metropolitan Police has,
Mhm.
I would wholeheartedly expect that from them because I've seen it firsthand, like how they handle protesters. I've seen them handle like 70-year-old white women with like a brutality that's like not necessary, right? But
Mhm.
this is in Cardiff. And I'm not obviously there are people of color in Wales. Like I'm not gonna say like no. But the representation is definitely gonna be lower than in like a metropolitan area like London.
Yeah.
So if we can't even get authorities and the police themselves to take our asks for just respect and dignity and justice seriously, I mean, how do we know that that's going to translate to a place that like might not even see this as necessarily as big of an issue as it actually is?
Yeah, and I think we've had this conversation on the show before as
Mhm.
we discussed BLM last year, in that the UK is not innocent in the ways in which its systems work against people of color. And when I think about Muhammad Hassan, it takes me to people like Christopher Adler in Hull, who also died in police custody. And the reason that we continue to speak these names and have these conversations is because we recognize that these are systems issues. When we're talking about global justice and global equity for Black and Brown people across the globe, we have to talk about the ways in which systems are manifesting themselves, not just in one country, but in multiple countries. And I think for us being here, I think, yeah, there is a level of exhaustion that comes with having this conversation. I think what makes us unique to have this conversation is our exhaustion is two and threefold to a certain extent. It is
For sure.
the distance of having and believing in the conversation that is happening in America, but also both of us being immigrants to
For
the
sure.
United Kingdom. We were adopted into a culture. I think myself being down here in London, I was adopted into Black British culture, right? Those were the people that I aligned myself with because of the diaspora, as the diaspora divas. That's where I fell in line. And so when I think about the systems that are enacted upon them, they are very reminiscent of the systems that are enacted upon Black and Brown people in the States. And I think thinking about that in a global context really does exhaust you, because it reminds you we have a lot more to fight for than we've even been able to scratch the surface in our 13 episodes of conversation. Like, we're
Sure.
circling around to having a deeper context conversation about us being here in the UK, which is why we're even bringing this up.
Mm,
But it's really showing that there are a lot of parallels and a lot of similarities to the systemic issues surrounding equity and justice impacting people of color here in the United Kingdom.
yeah, no, absolutely. And it's quite like jarring, is it the word? Shocking, I guess. It's like I've said before, like the racism in the UK is a lot more subtle and it's a lot more polite. And I say polite in the sense that like they're not gonna spit in your face, although that has happened to my friend in London. They're not gonna call you a monkey in the street, although that has happened to me. Um, but actually, I take that back. It's completely, it's not even that it's the same. It's just that like it's got a different accent. And so people immediately assume like, well, no, it can't be the same. And I guess it adds to, why is it that like when, because I felt the same way when I moved here as well 3 years ago. Um, I also immediately felt adopted into like the Black diaspora in Manchester. And I hadn't really had that in the US. Like I'm not gonna lie to you. Like when I got to Miami, I didn't really feel like the Black girls on my floor in my freshman halls were like actually trying to be my friend. Um I know, because I'm like hella nice. No, but
I
but
love you.
me too. No, but you know what I mean? Like it was this immediate like adoption of like, oh, where are you from? Congo, sick. I'm from Mozambique. Like, let's go chill, And I think that that's it's in a way like we're able to, I guess that's the resilience, isn't it? We're always able to find each other and we're always able to
Mhm.
form communities, no matter exactly where we're from. I could have a Haitian friend and you know what I mean? We could still have a lot more in common than like like I don't know, someone else that's black from New York, the way that I'm like black from New York technically because born there and whatever. But like even just in that sense, it is quite the diaspora is a beautiful thing, and I think as immigrants, like that is absolutely what we kind of rely on to get that sense of security, that sense of like home sometimes even. Um, but yeah, but I guess this brings us on to a topic which thoroughly affects immigrants in this country.
Yes, 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 yes.
Are you ready for it? Are we?
You know what? I think for our listeners and I think for ourselves, we spent so much time having a conversation surrounding the US elections because we understood the global impact, especially on Black and Brown people, that it was going to have.
Mm-hmm.
And while that was happening, or let me rephrase that, after that happened, we saw another massive global event in the West, and that was Brexit.
Brexit, Brexit.
Now,
Well,
people are probably going to say, like, oh, that happened after the election. I thought that happened years ago. And I'm
no,
sitting here going, yes, they technically voted in 2016, and it took us until January 1, 2021 to see it come to fruition.
for sure.
But it definitely, Brexit in a pandemic in a no deal. Woo, ma'am. As, as Black women sitting here having a conversation as immigrants, it is an interesting place to be sitting in this time,
You said it.
thinking about the implications that this is going to have, not just globally on things such as trade and commerce and things of that nature, but really the effects that it is going to have systemically
Mm,
in country on a very specific group of people. Because when they voted in 2016, let's be real, a lot of the Brexit fear was about having less immigrants in the country. It was
yeah.
about having a white British sentiment. It was going back to pure British values. That was the wording in the verbiage that we were hearing.
Well, that's the thing is that it wasn't even like because it was David Cameron's party that had put it. I mean, David Cameron had put it forward to his party, who were like, "Yes, let's do it,"
Mhm,
and then to put out the vote. But it wasn't even like it's not as if they actually sat there and thought, "Oh yeah, we want less immigrants." It
mhm.
was. in a sense, like, I don't want to say it was never about immigration because I'm not going to say that, but like, essentially, like, it was more of like, okay, let me put this forward to these, really kind of like long-standing conservatives whose support we need. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, people took to it. And
Mhm.
then it was Nigel Farage who was there
That's
saying,
correct.
like, oh my gosh, you know what? With Brexit, that also means less immigrants. Isn't it great? And that's kind of where the snowball started going. And then now it became this huge, like, issue and topic that revolved solely around immigration, when the reality of it is that, like, yeah, that's a massive, massive part of it. But again, we were ignoring the fact that, like, you leave a trade union like that, and that leaves gaps and holes, right, for people to come and fill it in. So when you've got Trump that's now elected, it becomes a question of like, oh yeah, we're going to make great trade deals for like healthcare. And so, you know what I mean? Like, the NHS did face a moment where it could have potentially gone from a publicly funded service to now a privately funded one that would also require, like, for you to pay for it. You know what I'm saying? So there really was that, like, it's not even, again, I'm not going to say that it wasn't about immigration because I'm not going to say that, but it encompassed a lot more than people initially thought. And then it became this massive conversation of, like, basically, if you vote Brexit, you're racist because you don't want immigrants. It's like, it reminded me a lot of essentially what was happening in the US at the same time as well with Trump. And we were forgetting a myriad of other things that were going to come with him being in office, or like that were going to come with him being at the head of like the Republican Party in that way. Do you know what I mean? Well,
Yeah,
not the head of the party, but you know what I'm saying. Representation.
yeah, no, I think in all honesty, what people have to recognize is that every choice has consequences, right?
Facts.
And in reality, as you said, when a David Cameron pitched this leaving, there was a talk of how this was going to grow the economy, this was going to change the trade sector, this was only going to benefit
Mm,
the country.
mm-hmm.
But what wasn't thought about were the concessions, the points of intersection, and the effects on actual human beings,
Mm-hmm.
and what those long-standing issues were going to be. And so while it may not have intended or started as a conversation surrounding immigration or surrounding who is quintessentially British,
British. Mm-hmm.
what it turned into, or the rhetoric was used to move it into a space in which it was passed, was this very inflammatory rhetoric surrounding Black and brown people. That's why we could get to a conversation where we saw an increase of attacks of outwardly Muslim looking people, Black people. You were going and you were seeing in communities of color where people were not being considered British,
Mm,
that you were seeing increased levels of violence, increased levels of surveillance,
mm-hmm.
because this new ideology, which wasn't necessarily new, it's definitely been covert and under the surface for a long time, but was awakened in this space in order to get this deal, or no deal, I guess, when you really put it out to the end, when it was all said and done,
Girl.
to pass. And I think what's so interesting, we talk about the economic trade-offs, or what we thought were going to be wonderful trade opportunities for the country. But when I think about people on the ground that were genuinely going to be affected, in particular Black and brown communities, a lot of the insecurity that was created by this no deal Brexit in particular was only exacerbating systems of inequality and
Yeah.
poverty in Black and brown communities, right?
Yeah.
So the unemployment rate in the Black community in 2019 in the UK, which is like the latest statistic that they have on their government website, is 2 times that of their white counterparts. They make up 3% of the population.
But they're
Black
twice
people
as
in the UK
unemployed.
make up 3% of the population, and they're 8% of the unemployment in the country, right? There
Jesus.
are 20% of Black British people are living in some type of compound poverty or inequality and deprivation of job access. That's only compounded with a no deal Brexit, when you're going to see increase in things like food insecurity, prices and hikes for normal everyday goods, changes in regulations around part-time work, all of these things that, we talk about. In the end, we're going to find this balance. We're going to find, some way to build the country up. But in a pandemic, you went into a no deal Brexit, and there are people on the ground who were already systemically suffering.
Yeah.
Who now that is further exacerbated.
It is actually mind-boggling. Like, it's not like I am by no means laughing because I find this funny or anything like that. It is absolutely because I'm just shocked that essentially like this is what we've come to. But then again, I'm not entirely shocked because this country has been run by a government that I'm not going to say they don't care about people, because I'm not going to say that. But what I've seen, at least throughout this entire pandemic, panorama, whatever you want to call it,
Annie.
Is that at the end of the day, it's never going to be the actual people first. It's always going to be that party's interests first. They have wasted billions of pounds on like a track and trace system that doesn't work. They have continued to just like mismanage public funds that are supposed to go to like relief, but actually don't. We've seen a footballer from Manchester United, Marcus Rashford, out here literally doing a better job than what elected officials have been doing for like the past year. Again, not saying that like no one's doing it. Like, this is an unprecedented situation, right? Whatever the right or wrong way to go about it is, we won't find out until later when it's in hindsight. But you gotta wake up and smell the reality at some point that like what you've been doing for the last 10 months is not working and has actually further divided the issues. And even as you were saying, like, so in the case of now, right, we're in a panorama. Like, there's, I am fully Gen Z today. Like, this is what I'm doing. I am no longer an elder millennial, because I found out the other day that I actually categorize as an elder millennial. So that means that you do too, which means we're getting old now. So
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm a youth.
I'm going to stick in my
That's
little
not girl.
Gen Z gimmicks and that. Just, okay, whatever. Like, I don't know. I don't do TikTok. But anyway, like, it literally, with Brexit comes a massive concern also for BAME communities, or at least immigrants, is access to healthcare and health services. And how, like, that's just kind of what's absolutely mind-boggling right now, is that like it's not even that there's always been an issue with the NHS. It's not, the NHS is actually a wonderful thing. I am a strong believer that like there should be national health services. There's one in France that it's the basis of like, how do you expect for your country to thrive and survive if you can't provide them with basic health services? Like, that is just point blank, period, right? So now if you've got a situation where you can't even have like, this isn't a result of the stress, the stress on the NHS is not a result of the pandemic. Like, it has been exacerbated by the pandemic. 120%. We've seen now the cracks fully because of it. We've seen the cracks in national health services across the West. Like, in France also, it's been an issue because essentially they don't have the bureaucratic systems to keep up with like providing a mass vaccination campaign like that, right? So we've seen all these cracks, but these cracks haven't been made by this pandemic. They have existed the entire time because in this country, in the UK, the Conservative government has been like cutting the budget of the NHS little by little every single year. So this is a result of neglect, straight neglect of the National Health Service. And so now you want to blame, you know what I'm saying? Now you want to blame when there's a second spike. You're not going to talk about, oh, perhaps it was Rishi Sunak's initiative of Eat Out to Help Out, when we told people to go to restaurants and we told people to go out and eat and all that stuff and do all these things that they couldn't do during the initial lockdown. No, we're not going to blame it on that. We're not going to blame it on the millions of people that went down to the beach during the summer, ignoring all kinds of like safe distancing rules because no, it's people's summertime. We're not going to blame it on that. We are, however, going to blame Muslim communities that celebrate Eid for the second spikes. We are going to blame students that are forced to go back to university for the second spike. We're going to blame BLM protesters for the second spike. The blame exists in one place and one place only. And in my opinion, it's in government. Because again, I'm not saying that there is a right or a wrong way to go about this situation. It's unprecedented. We don't know necessarily what's the best way to work like through it, but you got to be able to turn around maybe after like, I don't know, 6 months, turn around and go, did that work? Yeah, sort of. Okay, maybe we can like kind of alter it for like next time. It just blows my mind. But then again, it doesn't surprise me. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's
No, finish, because you were on a thought.
no, it's just mind-boggling. And it's like, you know, now it's what I hate is like, again, you and I, we say we're immigrants, but we are very privileged and fortunate immigrants. We don't come from countries that like are immediately blacklisted and stuff. We might be at the border asked a few more questions than that here and there. It's definitely happened to me a few times, but aside from that, like, you know, we're chilling, we're okay, right? But like literally, there are people in this country that are being, even if I take for example Boohoo, right?
Right.
The mega clothes manufacturer. They have factories in the UK where they are underpaying migrant women of color. Why? Because they can't go nowhere. They can't tell anybody that, oh, I'm being underpaid for this, because guess what? They might not be here legally. I say that with quotations for those who are only just listening. But yeah, they're, you know, quote unquote legally. So they're at risk, they're vulnerable. And companies like Boohoo, which I, again, personally, I'm like so against because it's just no, are able to take advantage of these hard migration rules and policies in order to have the cheapest labor in the world and then be able to sell those clothes cheap as well and not care, like from every point of view, whether it's environmental, humanitarian, like logistical, like it's just not okay. And it just blows my mind that like this is not, you know, I either, for me it's one of two things. Either those who are in power are fully aware that this is what's happening and want it to be that way, which I'm hoping that's not the case, because I want to give them the benefit of the doubt and think that like they are just engulfed in their like world of like high politics, that they can't see the regular everyday man and his worries and stuff. Because I don't want to believe that people would purposefully put others in that position. Where have we gone? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Where have we gone?
Yeah, and I think you've made a couple of points here that like
Sorry.
I want to. No. You're 1,000% in a space in which you should be able to go, because I think for so long we haven't necessarily been able to have these conversations in settings like this, and we haven't been able to kind of dive into the myriad of issues that we've experienced living over here. And so I think, yes, take the moment to truly go through this range of emotions, because there is a range of emotions that we have felt in the past 10 months, and that is a very real thing. So I think you were making some interesting points in regards to the way that the COVID-19 pandemic has affected things such as the NHS, or has exacerbated communities that already had issues and systemic problems surrounding them, right? So when we think about specifically, think about the no deal Brexit, right? And how we originally talked about how it wasn't an immigration issue. Well, 12.5% of the NHS are immigrants from either Black or brown countries. That's the reality of the fact. That's something that is propping up.
Actually, may I, I'm gonna do a tiny shout out to my auntie, Tantine Charlotte, who is an NHS nurse in Croydon. And that is exactly, you are on point. Congolese queen, she's out here saving babies and mamas.
We appreciate it. We appreciate you. We appreciate all the work that you've done, all the doctors, healthcare workers.
Yeah.
including my dad. We see you. We appreciate you. We extend our thanks. And in this pandemic, when I was reading the statistics from the UK government website yesterday, they were talking about how 1/3 of the COVID patients in the UK are Black. Black people in the UK make up less than 10% of the population, but they are 1/3 of the COVID patients that are being reported. Black men are 3.3 times more likely to die from COVID than white men. And Asian men are at 2.5%, 2.5, so they're still more than white men. Whereas Black women are 2.4 times more likely to die from COVID than white women. And this, when I was reading the World Economic Forum and I was thinking about what are some of the reasons in which we can see this happening specifically, in a first world country like the UK, what are some of the reasons in which we can see very particular populations being exacerbated by this pandemic, by this Brexit moment? All I can think about is the ways in which systems were enacted to not work for these people, right? There are things like you are at a higher unemployment rate, you are at lower paying jobs, you are more likely to be the people that have to actually go into communities. In the UK, I believe it was the Lammy report by MP David Lammy, and he was saying something like 26% of the prison population in the UK is Black. So you're in these smaller and more confined spaces. There are all of these systems issues here that are now exacerbated by a COVID-19, by a pandemic, by a no deal Brexit, because they were not designed for you, right? Yeah. When you originally see, this is the difference between the United States and Britain when it comes to Black and brown populations in general is the ways in which they migrated to this country. As we all know, Black people in America, for all, were not migrants. Enslaved people were taken. Period.
Run it back, play it again, louder for the people in the back if you need to. This was not a migration. This was like a kidnapping.
Took people and enslaved them. Different conversation. Whereas in the UK, colony countries, colony, can't see my air quotes on Spotify, colony countries, people migrated, right? The idea of there was work. The Windrush generation was told, come here, come build back the mother country. Right. Later, saw African countries, come here, come work, there's space, as you're democratizing, all of these things. So people were genuinely told and made to feel like they were a part of this system. They were inherently British. You were made to feel like this was supposed to be your space. And so there was almost this facade put up so that when things like systemic racism in terms of socioeconomics, healthcare disparities, housing crises, etc., were set in place, you didn't feel as though they were being enacted upon you, because there was almost this mentality of maybe I'm not working hard enough. Maybe I'm not garnering enough access. Maybe it's not the system that's working against me. Maybe it's something that I'm doing.
Right.
And I think what you were getting to in your point about now the pandemic, now Brexit, these compounding things are depicting these were not individual issues. These were not individual disparities. These were communities of color that were systemically disenfranchised over generations.
Nah, I mean, straight facts. Sorry, you were gonna finish your point.
No, that's exactly it, right? And so when I think about coming into this space and I think about the past 10 months, I think there was a turning point for myself as well as others when we reflect upon the ways in which the British system is enacted upon Black and brown people.
Yeah.
I think we've had to reflect a lot about what we thought was working that is no longer working. And I think a lot of people, honestly, with the start of the BLM movement that we saw, in June, you and I have talked about, the ways in which the ways in which the UK BLM movement differs from the US BLM movement. There's a lot of different reasons that they differ, but I do think that somewhere in there, we did see the rise of like the Black Young Professional Network. We saw some of these other grassroots groups start to think about the ways in which policy is affecting them.
Yeah.
And the ways in which systems are affecting them, and are starting to have conversations that are saying things which you and I referenced last season, like BAME or BME is not an appropriate way to handle issues in relation to minority ethnic communities, because the disparities in each of these communities is incredibly distinct.
Yeah. Yep. 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 I think even, you know what I mean, to reinforce even your point, like the even this awakening that we're talking about, right? Like I personally even went through it because I was like, oh wow, turns out my dear sweet France that I love till I die might not love me really that much, but like also could, it's confusing. But essentially, like even with I think we even saw that basically it I want to say that younger generations have also kind of joined in on the fight now as well.
Mhm.
I remember in Manchester in I believe it was in August. I went to a protest with my flatmate, and it wasn't huge, but I mean it probably was like 30, 40 people. It was decent for Manchester as well, like pretty
Yeah.
decent. And the people who were organizing it, I mean, they were literally like 19, 20. I think maybe 20. And I was there like, wow, honestly, like that is very reassuring to see so much like fervor and like, you know what I mean? Like passion for it. It's not even that it's passion, but it's like it's an urgency, right? Of like, oh my God, this has been, you know what I mean? Like I can't move in a space that's not gonna recognize me like this.
I think the kids younger than us, the Gen Zers, as they say, the TikTok generation, I think they picked up a baton that already existed.
Oh yeah.
I think that prior to us, whether we be talking about, the States or here, I think, here we're talking about your Darkest House, your Mangrove Nines, we're having a conversation that people have been doing this revolutionary work and attempting to dismantle systems
Yeah.
for generations. I think that torch was picked up by people after them, especially, in our generations. We know for a fact, we've got counterparts in this space, whether it be in the States or over here, who have been doing this work, right? This movement didn't start 10 months ago.
No, 100%.
That got picked up,
Mhm.
by the younger generation. And I think that a lot of actually the work that you're seeing at a grassroots level, while the protests and the voices in the street may look younger than they have in recent protests, I think the work that you're seeing at a policy, at an organizational level, as well as in the streets, is being done by a multi-generation coalition
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
people that are getting the job done. And I think there's no way in which Gen Z could reclaim space if
Mm.
all of the work, they stand on the back of a lot of people.
Yeah, no
You
way.
needed a lot of people to use their voice. You needed a lot of people to fight against injustice. You needed a lot of people to pull down the veil
Mm.
on issues across the globe so that people could start to speak more freely and more aptly about these issues so that we knew that they could not continue.
Mm.
And I think that is what is particular about this moment. And that is why I think it's important that we continue to have this conversation
Mhm.
around what is to come, right? Because we're coming up on a year removed from a ton of global justice initiatives, a ton of racial reckoning. And there have been things that have happened in that year that are monumental, that have absolutely, that people would think have nothing to do with these moments of racial reckoning, but really are compounding things that previously existed. And so I think by us asking questions like, what is the impact of Brexit on Black and Brown
Mm,
people? What is the impact of the policies that we're seeing a year out from the BLM movement? What is the diaspora coming together look like? We're really having a larger conversation of what do we want 2021 and beyond to look like? Because we know that it is only going to get there by us having these conversations and doing the work.
mm,
And so that's why it's so important for us to, call out these statistics. That's calling out these moments, us calling out these issues of disparity. They are not to, well, yes, they are to raise awareness. They are not to disparage that it cannot be better.
yeah, yeah. No, I completely agree, and I think it has just been a crazy year, hasn't it? Like I just can't really wrap my head around it. It's still like when I write down 2021, I'm like, no, but we haven't finished
You're telling me this
2020.
is
Like,
2020.2? What?
yeah, yeah, legit. Like, those memes of like, oh yeah, at midnight on January 31st, it's just gonna go like volume 2. I was like, no, Jesus, no. No, I completely yeah. And I think, do you know what? I think that not that it, again, there's nothing funny about anything that we're discussing here today, but I will say the one thing that did make me chuckle a little bit was like seeing a headline of a British family who's has a house in Marbella or something like that, some Spanish town, that all of a sudden now couldn't have access to their British TV channels because Brexit. And it just it's just those little things
The
where I'm
little things
like,
that you didn't think about.
yeah, I'm like, surprise, you're gonna need a visa now, probably to go anywhere. Surprise, your phone's not gonna work the same way that it works in the UK anymore, which I say that, but like, I'm heavily concerned with that because I have a British phone number. So, like, it's also my problem. So, like, again, there's nothing funny here. Like, it's just a tad laughable. But it is just, I'm very excited for the rest of this conversation, frankly. And like, I think that it's one where we, whether it's 45 minutes, an hour and a half, 2 hours, there's not enough time to discuss it. And like, there's multiple facets to it, and there's multiple things that you and I have probably not even thought of because it's not in our direct world. And I'm now at a place, weirdly, of peace, but more of like, I've accepted that this is the situation, right? I'm gonna fight it, but like, I've accepted that like this is where we're at. And I think that the hardest part, probably whether you can agree with me or not on this one here, but I think the most taxing part of the last year has been finally accepting that, like, yeah, the situation sucks, but it's been that way for a long time, and we are now seeing it because of these two kinds of stresses that have been put on, and we especially are seeing it because we belong to these communities of color.
Yeah, you kept saying these things aren't laughable, and all I can think about is like my mom saying, "You sometimes you laugh to keep from crying," and that's really the impetus around all of these issues.
Mm,
Growing up, I was not immune to these conversations. My parents were never trying to put a wool over my eyes about the ways in which systems were affecting Black and Brown people globally.
yeah.
They said, you may not understand what it looks like for somebody else, but you will always know that communities of color are going through something and you have to respect that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that for a lot of people, the past 11 months, because honestly, I don't know how long we've been in this panty now, but for a lot of people, they've had to reckon with a myriad of things. They've had to reckon with systems of racial injustice across the globe. They've had to reckon with the ways in which healthcare systems affect them versus how they affect other communities. They've had to reckon with the ways in which education are teaching our children, the ways in which housing insecurity, food insecurity, all of these systems that for many have been working for an incredibly long time, we are finding holes and flaws in said system. I think for those of us who have been engaged in these conversations, engaged in this work for a long time, we are not necessarily having a reckoning. We are having a moment of deep sigh. And the
Yeah.
reason that we're sighing is because we're no longer silent. These issues that we've been circulating for years are now at the forefront. But that is also incredibly tiring because the work that we choose to engage in is not simple, it is not easy, and it is not devoid of emotion.
Mm,
And so I think in this moment, I may feel weary, I may feel tired, and
mm,
I may feel disillusioned to the ways in which the world is enacting inequity
mm,
across communities of color. But I do have this glimmer of hope and this glimmer of resilience because these conversations are being had.
yeah.
People are listening. How well they're hearing is yet to be seen, but people are listening to things that they were not listening to before. We're
Right.
seeing policy across the globe being enacted in ways in which we've never seen it before. And communities that were disenfranchised, that honestly didn't even know that they were disenfranchised, are getting a voice. And
Right.
that to me is what's most important. And I think what makes you and I unique to have this conversation is our vulnerability and openness and our proximity to these issues.
Mm,
As we said at the beginning of this show, the Black diaspora is not a monolith. It is
mm,
deep, it is wide, but there are issues in particular for our community across the globe which seem to be consistent.
yeah.
So the more that we can engage in conversation across the pond, across these oceans, across these continents, only better can we further our community and further equity, not just for Black people, but for all people. Because when you pick up the most disenfranchised person, everybody rises.
Mm,
And so you and I may have questions. You know, we have a lot to learn, even though we've lived here 3-4 years. But by giving voice to people who know, we're only going to further the ways in which things can get better. And I'm excited to learn and to grow and to give back to a community that I feel like has enriched me
mm,
while being here.
mm. Amen. Amen. I do feel very enriched from being in the UK, you know. I actually completely agree. That is, I think that's, I keep saying this to I think it's my parents or someone else who listens to me, that like, it's my, it's the best decision I've made in my adult life to move here. Because I've never felt more, I'm not going to say at home because frankly, I don't know the concept of home as a third culture kid, but um, I've never felt more like directly accepted and not questioned about like yes questions but also just I'm French, sick, cool, I don't move on. Possibly the best decision I've ever made is moving here and I don't regret it, but it is just heartbreaking to see that like unfortunately everything that you just said of like what we see across the diaspora across the world and across centuries and time continue to exist even in this place that I am so thankful live it to live in and to be a part of and to be in. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, in all honesty, I think we're enriched for same and different reasons. I think
Mm,
the reason that I appreciate the space is because sometimes you need a mirror to be held up to you to show you that, you know, systems and inequality are not unique to certain places.
for sure.
And so I think the understanding of the global plight of people of color and disenfranchised populations was realized while I've been here. I think I've been given a unique perspective in terms of the ways in which my own community back at home in the States
Mm,
is disenfranchised, the ways in which, you know, you can utilize some of the things that we've learned to advance ourselves that could be implemented here and vice versa.
mm,
And I think that that unique ability only furthers the narrative and the work of communities of color and of organizations like WCAPS, right? You need a rich dearth of people working on these issues across the globe to truly find equity and racial justice. And I think the reason that we made an episode like this was really to start a global dialogue
Ooh.
to take a transition point to recognize that we are coming to this show with unique experiences, and we are bringing that with us wherever we go to have these conversations. The thing that makes this space so special and so important is its ability to truly get to the crux of what the issues are in an empathetic and equitable way. And
Mm.
I'm genuinely happy that we can start to dissect some of these large scale issues so that we can move forward from here. And I know Mel and I are both incredibly appreciative that people are going to continue to, come along this journey with us. So
Yeah.
this episode has been a moment of reflection. It's been a moment of contemplation, and it's been a moment of questioning and reckoning with where we're at. From
Yeah.
here, we can only move forward. We said it last season. This moment is a movement, and it should be appreciated as such.
Mm.
And we're going to continue to fight for equity and justice across the globe because people deserve that. We're excited to engage in these conversations. We have nothing but good things coming in the future. And as always, we want to say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming to Got Melanin.
Everybody gather round and listen to my song.